Good evening. This is James Exum coming to you once again from my studio in South Austin, Texas. Tonight, instead of allowing the narrator on my word program read my text to you, my discourse to you, I shall read it myself. My voice seems to be a little stronger today. I've allowed it about a week's worth of rest. And maybe that's the solution to the problem. Maybe I was overusing my voice box. Tonight, the program I will present to you is called The American Dream. It is something I grew up listening to, the promise of an American dream that belonged to all Americans, all children, all parents, all grandparents, and the population in general. And that dream consisted of one single idea. The generation that follows the last one will have a better path in life. Not easier necessarily, but financially better. Education should be better. Lifestyle should be better. And the world that developed, that they will live in, developed out, that they will live in by their parents, should be more harmonious and more honest. That's the idea behind the American dream that I grew up with in the 1950s. So, enough of my introduction. Let's go right to the text now. The American Promise by myself, James Exum. I've copyrighted it today's date, August 19th. All rights are reserved. I always like to put a little quotation between the title lines and the beginning of the text. And here's the one I chose for this section. Change begins when people stop whispering what they know is wrong and start saying it out loud. Now into the text. There was in those earlier days a noble American promise. It was plain enough for any household to understand that each generation should be given a fair chance to rise a little higher than the one before it, not without hardship, not without sacrifice, but with steady confidence that tomorrow, by honest labor and sound character, might prove better than yesterday's. That promise was not written upon marble tablets. It was fashioned in the commonplaces of American life, in factories and schoolrooms, in churches and neighborhoods, in kitchens and modest homes, by men and by women who believe that work, discipline, family, and decency could open a wider road for their children. When the Second World War ended, America came home weary but unbowed. Soldiers returned to civilian streets, families grew. The nation raised houses, stretched highways, opened schools, and filled factories. Wages could carry a household in those days. A high school diploma had weight. A union card had value. A home of one's own did not seem beyond reach. College, once reserved for the few, began to stand within sight of many. The GI Bill was the hope and dreams of returning soldiers and their families. In those years, many Americans believed that the latter was sturdy. A family in a small house might expect its children to own a larger one. Parents who labored with their hands could see hope that their sons and daughters might someday labor with their minds. Those who had left school early could still dream of children carrying books across a college campus. For children born around 1940, roughly 9 in 10 one day would earn more than their parents. Today that figure stands 1 and 2. What a comparison. That is not merely a figure in a ledger, it is a red lamp burning on the nation's instrument panel. Work itself was altered. Factories went dark. Good jobs to party towns that had depended upon them machines took the place of workers. Companies crossed borders and oceans in search of cheaper hands. Once a young man could leave high school and still find labor enough to buy a home. That doorway is nearly shut. Wages cease to keep proper pace. Men and women continue to work, yet their earnings lost ground while rent, food, gasoline, insurance, college tuition, and medical care climbed higher and higher. Too often the paycheck arrived only to be immediately spoken for by the month's demands, the month's expenses. Opportunity became costly. Better schools, safer streets, college, training, and the liberty to move where work could be found all required money. Courage begins when people stop whispering what they know is wrong and start saying it out loud. Reading and learning declined as well. Too many children were advanced before they could read with confidence. A child who cannot read cannot fully enter history, science, law, business, or even the instructions on a work application. Reading is not merely a school lesson. Reading is liberty and life. In 2024, national reading scores for the 4th and 8th graders fell again when compared with 2022. This matters greatly. A nation that does not read well will not think well. A nation that does not think well cannot choose well. Wars too extracted their price. Korea, the Cold War, Vietnam, the Gulf War, Iraq, Afghanistan, and now Iran. Each demanded payment. Some costs were counted in dollars, some were counted in lives, some were borne by broken households and wounded bodies, some were paid in trust. Family life, and neighborhood life changed also. Too many children grew up without firm ground beneath their feet. Parents rose tired before the day had fairly begun. Elders were too often set aside and sometimes just merely forgotten. Communities lost many of the small anchors that once held them fast. The front porch, the corner store, the church basement, the coach, the teacher, and the neighbor who knew one's name. Trust diminished, confidence in government, newspapers, great businesses, and even in one another grew weaker and weaker. When trust breaks, a nation may still proceed, but it proceeds with a limp. The promise did not fall in a single hour. It was weakened piece by piece. Here a shuttered factory, there a starved out school, a family priced out of a home, a child advanced without learning to read, wars that drained treasure and confidence, and generations were first told by the government to wait, then to borrow, and finally to expect less. Still the people kept at their work. Still they worked. They must not be forgotten. They continue to love their children and wish better lives for them. But good wishes alone cannot mend a broken matter, especially when too many of its upper rungs are guarded jealously by those already standing above it. We must speak plainly. Hard work, discipline, family and education still matter, yet the system around them matters also. A country cannot preach responsibility to the poor while rewarding greed in high places. Let me read that one again. A country cannot preach responsibility to the poor while rewarding greed in high places. It cannot call education the answer, while permitting children to fail at reading. You cannot praise the worker and then send the work away to other countries, other shores. To rebuild the promise will require more slogans, banners, or speeches from platforms. It will require honest labor, sober priorities, and the courage to repair what has long been neglected. Children must learn to read early and to read well. Schools must become again houses of order, learning, and great expectation. Work must pay enough to sustain a family. Labor must cover its dignity. Men and women need training for the work that exists, and neglected towns need work brought back within their reach. We must cease pretending that every child begins at the same starting point. Some begin with books in the house, others begin with hunger. Some begin with two parents, some begin with just one. Some begin with fear, but justice means seeing these differences clearly while still calling every child one of promise. We must honor service and yet speak honestly about the war. Those whom we send must be cared for when they return. We should be slow to fight and swift to heal, for the cost of war does not end when the guns fall silent. Trust must be rebuilt by truth, and truth calls for courage. Courage begins when people stop complaining and go back to hard work. The great American promise was never that life would be easy, that every road would be smooth, or that every child would become rich. It was that the road would remain open. That if a person worked, learned, served, saved, and stood upright, he or she might move forward, and their children might move farther still. This is what has been lost, and that is what must be regained. We owe such effort to those who came home from war and built, to those who marched and sacrificed, to those who worked double shifts and still showed love for family and community, and to the children who are watching us now. The promise remains simple. Each generation should have a real chance to rise beyond the generation before it. If that promise is fading, we must not avert our eyes. We must name the injuries, mend the latter, and work hard for the future. For if the promise dies, America becomes just another country on an ever-changing globe. It's a serious group of statements, but I tried to put as much truth and as much of the feelings of my heart into it. That's why I chose to read it myself. I don't believe a mechanical voice, an AI voice, could have read it with the proper emotions and passion. And there it is. If you like this, that's good. If you didn't care for it at all, that's okay too. But if there was anything in there that touched you and entered your mind and said, things do need to go back to the idea, things need to return to the American dream, then tell your friends and family and let them hear what I had to say tonight. And maybe little by little things will start changing for the better. Who knows? Anything bad that's happening, as the old saying goes, that too shall pass. So thank you for coming. I hope to see you in my next video, or have you see me or hear me in my next video. And at that point, I'll talk to you once again. So good night and thank you.